We could talk all night about how polyphase works and all that good stuff, but we got lots of time to cover this stuff in some of the next meetings. Anyway, hopefully my mouse works here. Prodigal genius. Oh, come on. All right, Tesla was born in what is a little tiny town in what is now Croatia. This is the ocean right here, and this is all Yugoslavia. His father was a priest. That's the house he was born in, and this right here is just a little church that his father held his services in. There's his father, Milutin, and his mother, Duka. He had two sisters. He had a brother who died, and I think that had a big effect on his life, but he made through it. Now, his mother was extremely intelligent. She was uneducated, unschooled, but she was extremely intelligent. So genetically, he always gives her credit for his brains. The father wanted him to go into the priesthood, but he realized in an early age that was not going to happen. Whoops, wrong thing. There we go. Woo. Okay, young Tesla started primary school. He had a bout of cholera, almost killed him. And this is an interesting story. In 1882, this is when he discovered, came up with the concept of the rotating magnetic field. And he's a poet, just like us. He was actually walking down the road reciting Faust to his friend, and suddenly he had this revelation about how a polyphase system worked, and that was probably a download. So that's probably his first big download that he got from the masses. But it's nice to think that, like us, he's also a poet. He went to Paris. We went to school, obviously, but we can't talk about his education. And he got a job working for Edison in Paris. He made quite an impression on the people there, and he was introduced. He got a letter of recommendation. He decided to go to America and go meet Edison and get a job with this recommendation. Okay, now we want to talk about how Tesla's brain worked and why he was so able to come up with all these miraculous things in his head. But basically what had happened was he has the ability to visualize three-dimensional images in his head very, very clearly, very, very bright, and in very, very fine detail. So essentially he could assemble things, he could design, assemble, run, test for wear, weakness, efficiency, and build a prototype in his head before he ever built the prototype. So he could assemble a motor in his head, run that thing in his head, take it apart after 100,000 cycles, and check each piece for wear and tear, redesign it, put it back together, repeat the process until that motor was 100% perfect. So before the thing ever went to the manufacturing, he had already run thousands of tests in his head. And to do that today, we have to use some pretty sophisticated computers. Okay, alternating current, again, we're not going to get too much into this, but what he did was he realized that by creating magnetic fields, and there's actually three coils here, so there's three magnetic fields. And what happens is one will create a field, it turns off, the other one goes on, it turns off, the other one goes on. And what happens is as these fields are going around in a circle, it's causing the armature and the center to spin around, and that's essentially where the motion comes from, thus converting electricity into mechanical energy. The big thing about alternating current versus DC, which was the big thing at the time, is that alternating current has the ability to travel great distances without losing its efficiency. So if you start out with 120 volts, 200 miles down the way, you still have 120 volts. With a DC system, you'd have 120 volts, and about 20 miles away from the power plant, it would be down to 50 volts or something like that. So it wasn't so according, if Edison had his way, we'd have big, ugly power plants every 20 miles. And cities would not have gotten very big, and we wouldn't have anything close to what we have today. Not to mention the efficiency of the AC motor. So he went to America, and he hooked up to Thomas Edison, and Thomas Edison was quite a character, also a genius, just like Tesla. But Thomas Edison was a self-made man, a self-taught man. He believed that invention was 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. Whereas Edison, of course, Tesla, did complex mathematical calculations before he did anything. Anyway, Edison saw the AC system as a potential competitor, but he still hired him because he felt that there was something about this guy that he wanted to tap into. The first thing he did was he gave Tesla a job. He said, "I'll tell you what, I'll give you $50,000 if you can take my DC motor and improve it and get all the bugs out of it and increase its efficiency." And Edison, of course, thought this was an impossible job, and Tesla said, "Sure." So he went and did it. He comes back and says, "Here you go." And Edison said, wow, I really wasn't expecting you to do it. And he said, huh, you're not really expecting me to give you the money, that's our American humor. So, anyway, needless to say, Tesla and Edison parted company right after that. This is a big giant generator, a DC generator. Obviously, Edison is very famous for his gramophone and your Edison light bulb. Oh, if you look at this right here, it says 2 Tesla. So, the guy had a real good sense of humor. He opened up a shop in New York on 40th Street, and he began to start making arc lamps and light bulbs. Here's the first photograph ever made with a arc lamp. And so this was the first photograph, and that's a pretty historic thing. That's Tesla's hand. Here's a picture of him holding one of his lamps, of course, with wireless energy. And we're going to do that real quick. Oh, I forgot to do that. Gosh, we'll have to do that later. He basically had some problems. There was a depression at the time, and he lost everything. He ended up being a street sweeper in New York, a sewer worker. But after a while, he had a bunch of patents in the works, and when some of those patents came through, he had something to work with, and he went to Western Telegraph, and they gave him some money and hooked him up, and he got a new shop. He also did a famous lecture before the Institute of Electrical Engineers at Columbia College in New York, and one of the people in the audience was none other than George Westinghouse. George Westinghouse, oh my gosh, I got to have this guy working for me. So he buys Tesla's patent for $1 million, and he tells him he's going to pay him $1 per horsepower on every AC item sold. Now just imagine how many horsepower of AC motors there are in the world today, and think of that in $1 per horsepower. Okay, so he goes to work for George Westinghouse, and thus begins the war of the currents between AC and DC. One thing we ought to say about George Westinghouse, because we talk a lot about these industrialists of the era and how so many of them were total jerks and just greedy bastards. Westinghouse is probably one of the greatest Americans of all time, okay, because he was a good man. He was not out to screw people, and he really served this country well. And together, Tesla and Westinghouse made a fantastic team, and those two are responsible for giving the world AC power. And together, they had to fight the whole world, everybody else, all the big money people. Here's a picture of him with Lord Kelvin, another famous scientist, and it was guys like this who basically came along and said that AC was the way to go, and that really helped him get ahead of Edison. But it was a long battle. One of the things that Edison did to try to convince people that AC was dangerous and that DC was the only thing to have in your home was he liked to electrocute animals. He would hire the little street urchins to go out and kidnap people's pets, dogs, cats, and what have you. And he would put on these public demonstrations where he would electrocute these animals and say, oh my gosh, this is what's going to happen to you if you let this power into your home. He went so far as to actually take a rogue elephant, which had caused some problems at a circus, and electrocuted it publicly, and that was the peak of this demonstrations that he was doing. So, rest in peace, Topsy. Along came the Columbia Exposition of 1893. Big historic event. And this is one of the things where America really got to showcase a lot of new technology, and this was really spectacular. George Westinghouse and Edison both bid on the contract to provide electrical light for the event. Edison bid $1 million and Westinghouse bid $250,000. So, you know, Edison didn't have a chance. Neon lighting that was on display. That should, I mean, you can imagine 18 whatever, and here we have neon lighting. You know, it's amazing. This is part of the exhibit. These are big giant monsters, 500 horsepower motors, and he also had big monsters generators on display. They actually produced the power for the entire show. So you saw all those light bulbs. People who were coming to that show had never seen anything like this before. Thousands and thousands of light bulbs. There's nothing like that before. So that was a big deal. It made a big impact on the whole world, and it really helped push AC power in front.